5 years ago, my fiancé ended our engagement with one text, 11 weeks before the wedding, and blocked me everywhere before I finished reading it. No explanation ever came. I grieved it the way you grieve a death with no body. 3 months ago, I restored my mother's old phone as a favor, because I'm the family tech guy, and the recovery tool surfaced a deleted message thread from 5 years ago. 41 messages. By the time I reached message 9, I knew why my fiancé left me. By message 41, I knew who my mother was, and the part I still can't get past isn't even in the messages. It's that the phone number she used to do it was one I set up for her myself. Let me back up. I'm Dominic. I'm 33. I do IT support for a regional insurance company, and in my family, that translates to unpaid staff. Printers, routers, mysterious pop-ups. The Facebook looks different. All of it comes to me, and I've never minded, because in my family, fixing things is how you say I love you. Remember that sentence. It's going to curdle. My mother is Carol Lynn. She's 61. She was a school office administrator for 30 years. She runs a book club, a church committee, and, I understand now, everything else. My mother is warm the way a heat lamp is warm, constant and aimed. She has a verbal tic I've known my whole life, the throat clear before management. She starts sentences with, "Now, I say this in love." Everything after that comma is a directive. File that phrase away. It's the whole case. My father is Frank. He's 64, retired machinist, a genuinely gentle man who has spent 4 decades treating my mother's opinions like weather, something you dress for, not something you argue with. My sister Paige is 36, married, 2 towns over, and she and I have a good, normal, group chat kind of relationship. And there was Whitney. We met at 25, engaged at 27, and I'm not going to write 3 paragraphs about how it felt because you've all either had it or you're hoping for it. She was funny in a quiet way that snuck up on you. She was an ER nurse who could de-escalate anyone, which turned out to matter because my mother auditioned her for 2 straight years and Whitney never once took the bait. And that was the problem, though I couldn't see it then. My mother would press the wedding guest list, the venue, the church, the flowers, always framed as help, always opening with, "I say this in love," and Whitney would smile and say, "We've got it handled, Carol Lynn, but thank you." Polite, immovable. I used to be proud of that. My mother, I realize now, was keeping score of it. 2 pieces of household infrastructure you need, because this story runs on them. First, the charging basket. Sunday dinner at my parents' is mandatory, and phones go in a wicker basket on the kitchen counter. House rule since smartphones existed. We talk to faces at this table. Every Sunday for years, my phone sat in that kitchen, unlocked half the time because my passcode back then was my dad's birthday, which the entire family knew. Second, the number. 6 years ago, my mother wanted to sell furniture on those marketplace apps, and she'd read a scary article, so I, helpful son, set her up with a second phone number through a free texting app, a clean little alias number so strangers couldn't have her real one. I installed it. I tested it. I showed her how to delete conversations. I want that in the record in my own words. I armed her, trained her, and told her it was untraceable, because at the time, I was proud of the word. Now, the breakup, 5 years ago, so you have the shape of the wound. Things had been normal. I mean normal. We'd done a cake tasting 11 days earlier. She'd sent me a spreadsheet about hotel blocks. Then over about 6 weeks, Whitney got quiet, distant in a way I couldn't name, tired, canceling little things. I asked twice if we were okay and got just wedding stress. And then on a Tuesday, at 4:40 inches the afternoon, while I was at work resetting somebody's password, my phone buzzed. "I can't do this. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry." By the time I called, blocked. Instagram, blocked. Her sister's number, blocked. I drove to her apartment and her roommate, who looked at me like I was a stranger with a knife, said Whitney didn't want to see me and closed the door. 11 weeks before our wedding, the woman I was going to marry evaporated, and no one, not her people, not mine, could tell me why. I want to tell you what my mother did during the collapse, because for 5 years this was my proof of her love. She was magnificent. She canceled vendors, so I wouldn't have to hear the venue lady's voice. She sat with me on the back porch. She said the sentence I have quoted to therapists and to myself at 2 a.m. If she folded this easily, sweetheart, she saved you a divorce. She framed my devastation as a lucky escape, week after week, until it almost took. And in the 5 years since, every woman I've dated has eventually met my mother, and every relationship has developed a mysterious wobble within a month of that meeting, and I chalked it up to me, to being the guy with the crater where a wedding used to be. One example, so you can see the pattern I couldn't. 2 years ago, I dated a woman for 7 months, a good 7 months, and when it got real, my mother invited her to lunch, girls only, her treat, so sweet. My girlfriend came back from that lunch different, quieter, careful with me, like I was something she'd read a warning label about. 3 weeks later, she ended it, kindly, vaguely. I don't think I'm what you need right now. And when I pressed, just once, she said something that made no sense at the time and rings like a bell now. She said, "Your mom really loves you, Dominic." She told me things I don't think she should have. I asked my mother what they'd talked about, and she did the wounded blink, hand to the chest, recipes, sweetheart. And I told her how proud I am of how you rebuilt yourself. Some women can't handle a man with history. Some men just aren't built for it. My mother would sigh afterward, in love, and I carried it as a diagnosis for 5 years. It wasn't a diagnosis. It was a maintenance schedule. Okay, 3 months ago, spring, my mother upgraded phones, and I, family tech guy, offered to transfer her data, standard Sunday afternoon job, her at the counter making iced tea, me at the kitchen table with 2 phones and a laptop. Her cloud backup was corrupted, which happens, so I ran a deep local recovery, which is routine, and recovery tools do not respect the delete button. That is their entire job. A progress bar, a coffee, and then a list of recoverable items, including deleted conversations from an app I recognized instantly because I'd installed it. The furniture selling app, the alias number. I almost didn't look. I need you to believe that, because I've been asked. I wasn't snooping, I was verifying the recovery worked, and the way you do that is you spot check a thread. And the thread at the top of the deleted list was 41 messages long, dated 5 years ago, spanning exactly the 6 weeks before a Tuesday in June. And the phone number on the other end of it was one I will know by heart until I die, because I once mailed 40 save the dates with it as the RSVP contact. Whitney, my mother on the alias number I built for her, texting my fiancée. The profile name on the account wasn't Carol Lynn, it was Nancy. And in my mother's own contacts, that alias number was saved as Nancy Book Club, so that if it ever rang or previewed on a screen, it would look like nothing, a casserole friend, a nobody. My mother did not just run a covert operation against my marriage. She built it a cover identity, using tradecraft I taught her, and named it after her Tuesday reading circle. I read all 41 messages sitting at her kitchen table while she hummed in the living room with her iced tea, and read it. I am going to give you the shape of them now and the worst of them later, because that's how I had to survive them too. Nancy introduced herself to Whitney as a longtime friend of the family who couldn't stay quiet in good conscience. Nancy was so sorry to do this. Nancy thought Whitney deserved to know before the wedding, not after. And then, over 6 weeks, with pacing that a marketing department would admire, Nancy fed my fiancé a case file. Screenshots of texts I never sent, doctored from real ones, my actual contact names, my actual thread layouts, because the raw material was harvested from my unlocked phone in a wicker basket on Sunday afternoons. A fabricated flirtation with a coworker. A fake screenshot of a loan statement suggesting I was hiding $40,000 of debt. And coaching, Reddit, message 17 is coaching. Nancy telling Whitney, do not confront him. Men like this talk their way out. Protect yourself and go quietly. I've seen this before. And message 41, the last one, dated the day after the Tuesday. It's from Whitney to Nancy. It says, thank you for telling me the truth. Please look after him. He'll need his family. Please look after him. She left believing she was releasing me, gently, to the people who loved me, and the person on the other end of that message put the phone down, walked into my ruin, and looked after me, for 5 years. Casseroles and porch talks, and she saved you a divorce. I did not stand up. I did not walk into the living room. I have replayed my own stillness 100 times, And I think, honestly, it was the tech in me, because the first coherent thought I had wasn't rage, it was preserve the evidence. I exported the recovered thread to my own drive, twice. I photographed the screen with my phone, all 41, in order. I finished the data transfer like a professional, handed my mother her new phone, ate a slice of lemon cake, kissed her cheek at the door, and told her the new phone looked great on her. Then I drove 4 blocks, pulled into a church parking lot, and screamed until my throat gave out. And then I got very quiet inside, quieter than I've ever been, and I started making a list of what needed verifying. Because I knew, sitting in that parking lot, that I was only going to get one shot at this, and that when I took it, the words "I say this in love" were not going to save her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A lot of you are going to ask why I didn't drive back those 4 blocks and put the phone on the dinner table that same night, and here's the honest answer. Because for 5 years I'd been the man whose fiancée left without a reason, and half my family privately believed there must have been a reason, and I was not going to hand my mother a chaotic confrontation she could reframe by Sunday. I've watched her reframe things my whole life. If I was going to do this, it was going to arrive like an audit, not an argument. So for 3 weeks I verified, and I want to walk you through it, because the verification is where the last of my doubt died. The fake screenshots first. The flirty coworker in the doctored thread was a real person, a woman from my office named in the images, and the profile photo Nancy used for her was cropped from a picture taken at my company's summer picnic. A picnic my mother attended, as my +1, the year I was engaged. The fake loan statement was built from a real document, my father's old boat loan paperwork, same bank logo, same layout, with my name typed over his. That one took me a day to place, and when I placed it, I had to go for a walk, because it meant she'd stood at her own filing cabinet, selecting materials. Then I told Paige, my sister, I need to be honest about how that went, because the first 10 minutes were the loneliest of the entire thing. I laid the printouts on her kitchen island, and Paige, who loves me, read them with her hand over her mouth, and then her first full sentence was, "Okay, but there has to be context." Maybe Mom was actually worried about something real and went about it wrong. Context. For a fake identity named after her book club. And I didn't yell. I just slid message 17 across the island, the coaching one, "Do not confront him. Men like this talk their way out. Go quietly." And I watched my sister read her own mother, teaching a stranger how to leave me without a trial. Paige put the page down, walked to her sink, gripped it with both hands for a second, and when she turned around, she was somebody new. She said, "Mom told me Whitney had been texting some other guy 5 years ago. She told me that in confidence, so I'd stop asking questions. Dominic," I repeated that at Thanksgiving. My sister spent 5 years believing, and occasionally spreading, a rumor my mother invented to backstop her own operation. There were flying monkeys in this story. Reddit. My mother had deployed them before there was ever anything to defend. The hardest part of those 3 weeks was Sunday dinner, because there were 2 of them, and I attended both, because breaking pattern would have tipped her. I sat at that table and put my phone in the wicker basket like a good son, and my mother, at the second dinner, patted my hand in front of everyone and said, "I saw Marcy's boy got engaged. Don't you worry, sweetheart. Some men just aren't built for marriage, and that is nothing to be ashamed of." I looked at my mother and smiled and said, "You're probably right, Mom," while 41 messages sat in 3 separate backups, and honestly, learning I could do that frightened me a little. Turns out it's genetic. And then the piece I actually needed. Whitney. Finding her took an evening, a mutual friend's tagged photo, a married name, a hospital system 2 states away. She's still a nurse. I wrote the email 11 times. The version I sent was 4 sentences. "Whitney, it's Dominic. 3 weeks ago, I recovered deleted messages from a number called Nancy Book Club, and I know what was sent to you 5 years ago, and I know none of it was true. If you ever want the proof, or a conversation, I'll drive to you. If not, I'll never contact you again, and I hope your life is wonderful." I hit send at 9:14 on a Tuesday night. At 10:03, my phone lit up, and I had to sit down on my kitchen floor to read it, and I'm just going to quote the whole thing, because I've earned it, and so has she. I have been waiting 5 years for this email. I knew something was wrong with all of it by year 2, and by then I was too married and too ashamed to pull the thread. I kept everything. There's a folder on my laptop called Why. There's something in it you need to hear, not read. Hear. Can you talk Thursday? I'm 2 states away, but I'm told that's what cars are for. Okay. This is the part I've rewritten 4 times. Because Thursday was the strangest day of my life, grief and evidence, and something that felt embarrassingly like first date nerves, all in one coffee shop booth 2 states from home. She looks the same. That's a stupid detail, and I'm keeping it in. Whitney sat down across from me with a laptop bag, and for a second neither of us managed anything. And then she said, "You got taller," which I did not, at 33, and we both laughed the wrong amount, the way you laugh at a funeral, and then we worked, because that's who we both are. 2 professionals with a case file. Her side first, and read it. Hearing the con from inside the con is a different kind of nausea. Nancy's first message arrived on a Sunday evening, warm, apologetic, credible. "You don't know me, but I've known Dominic's family 20 years, and my conscience won't let me watch this. And here's what made it work," Whitney said. Nancy knew things. Real things. What we'd fought about that week. The name of our venue. That Whitney's father had left her mother, which Whitney had told almost no one, and which Nancy gently invoked. You, of all people, know what it looks like when a man has a second life. Every drop of intelligence my mother harvested at Sunday dinners, from my basket-parked phone and from my own trusting mouth, got repackaged as an omniscient stranger's credibility. She never pushed, Whitney said. She'd send something awful and then go quiet for days. She let me convince myself. It was the best-run thing that's ever been done to me, and I work in an emergency room. The doctored screenshots had been the finishing blow, the fake coworker, the fake debt, and then message 17, "Don't confront him. Men like this talk their way out." "So I didn't," Whitney said, looking at her coffee. "I did the thing I have regretted for 5 years. I didn't give you a trial. I texted, I blocked, and I told my roommate you'd probably cheated, and I watched her look at you at the door like a criminal, and I let her." She said the next part slowly. "I need you to hear the order of events, Dominic. I didn't stop loving you and then leave. I left, and then spent 2 years failing to stop." And then she opened the laptop, and the folder named Why, and she said, "Nancy made exactly 1 mistake in 6 weeks. She broke her own rule. The night before I ended it, I was wavering. I'd typed out a message to you asking about the coworker. I told Nancy I wanted to hear your side, and 40 minutes later, Nancy, who had only ever texted, left me a voicemail. 52 seconds. Whitney had kept it for 5 years, transferred phone to phone like a splinter she couldn't leave alone. "Something about the voice always nagged at me," she said. "The pitch was wrong, like someone talking through a scarf. But there was one phrase," and she pressed play, and a voice came out of that laptop, lowered, careful, a stranger's voice wearing a disguise, urging Whitney not to reach out, to be strong, to go quietly, and 21 seconds in, the disguise did the thing that disguises do under pressure. It reached for a familiar handhold. The voice said, "Now, I say this in love. I say this in love." 4 words I have heard before every managed moment of my life, at graduations and job changes and cake tastings, coming out of a laptop in a coffee shop, aimed 5 years backward at the woman I was supposed to marry. Whitney watched my face and said quietly, "Yeah, that's what nagged. I'd only met your mother 11 times. It took me until last year to place it, and by then, what was I going to do with it?" Here's the reframe, and it isn't the voicemail. The voicemail was just the proof. The reframe was Whitney's left hand, where a wedding ring recently wasn't, and what she told me about her calendar. She's divorcing. Filed 7 weeks ago, amicable, no kids, a marriage she describes as "a good man I married," to prove a point to a ghost. And then she said the thing I drove 2 states back replaying. Last spring, before I filed, I drove past our venue. I told myself it was on the way. It is not on the way, Dominic. It is 40 minutes from anything. I sat in that parking lot for an hour, and I couldn't tell you what I was doing there, and now I can. I was visiting the scene of a crime I couldn't name yet. I told her everything on my side. The 5 years, the porch talks, she saved you a divorce, the wobbling girlfriends, the wicker basket, and the part I'd been dreading saying out loud, that the alias number was my own installation, my tutorial, my proud little security lecture, that I armed her. And Whitney, who de-escalates for a living, put her hand flat on the table, not quite touching mine, and said, "You handed your mother a hammer because you thought she was hanging pictures. The hammer isn't the crime, Dominic. The swing is." We sat in that booth for 4 hours. We are not back together, before the comments run ahead of the facts. We are two people who had 5 years stolen by the same thief, comparing damage assessments. And somewhere in hour 3 she laughed at something dumb, I said. The real laugh, the sneak-up one, and I had to look out the window for a second. She sent me the voicemail file and the whole "why" folder before I left the parking lot. Her last words on the sidewalk were, "Whatever you do it with witnesses." She doesn't reframe well in front of witnesses. I learned that from 41 messages. It's been 7 weeks since the coffee shop, and everyone in this story has now heard the voicemail, so let me give you the ending, which is quieter than some of you will want and larger than I expected. I did it at Sunday dinner, because of course I did. The wicker basket got my phone one last time, we ate the roast, and when my mother stood to clear plates, I said, "Mom, sit down a minute. Paige and Dad should hear this too." Paige knew. My father did not. My mother sat, with the alert stillness of a woman who has been waiting years for some version of this sentence without knowing which one, and I put a small speaker on the table, and I said, "A number called Nancy Book Club sent Whitney 41 messages in the 6 weeks before she left me. I've recovered all of them. This was the only voicemail," and I pressed play. 52 seconds is a long time at a dinner table. My mother's face, for the record, did not crumble, gasp, or perform. It closed, like a store. My sister stared at the tablecloth. And my father, my gentle, weather-dressed father, sat with his head tilted at the speaker like a man identifying a bird call. And when the voice on it said, "Now, I say this in love," I watched 40 years of marriage cross his face in about 2 seconds. My mother's first words, and I want them preserved exactly, were, "That could be anyone." So I did the audit, calm, in order, the way I'd built it. The alias number, registered by me, for her, on her email, 6 years ago. Here's the account page, Mom. The picnic photo, cropped. Dad's boat loan, with my name typed over his, and my father's head turned slowly from the speaker to her at that one. Message 17. And message 41, which I read out loud, "Thank you for telling me the truth. Please look after him. He'll need his family." And I looked at my mother and said, "And then you did. For 5 years. I've spent 3 weeks trying to find the word for what that is, and there isn't one." And my mother read it, did the thing that I genuinely believe closes the case on who she is, because cornered people show you the operating system. She did not deny it again. She straightened her napkin, and she defended the mission. "Everything I did because I could see what you couldn't. That girl never once took guidance. Not on the venue, not on the flowers, not on the guest list. Always we've got it handled," with that little smile. A girl who won't take guidance at 27 becomes a wife who takes your children to another state at 40. I've watched it happen to better families than ours. I didn't end anything, Dominic. I ran a test, and she failed it in 6 weeks. You should be thanking me for the timing. She looked around the table for the nod she has collected her whole life. I say this in love. I saved this family. And that's when my father stood up. Frank, 64 years old, a man I have heard raise his voice maybe 4 times in my life, pushed his chair back, and stood, and looked at his wife, and said the sentence that I suspect is the actual ending of this story, whatever happens to the rest of us. I've heard versions of that voice my whole marriage. And then, quietly, with the plates still on the table, he itemized. The best friend I had in 1989 who suddenly wasn't good for me. Remember, Carol? The Denver job that fell through, except I found out in 1996 it never fell. You turned it down on our phone before I got home. 40 years of weather, Reddit, and my father had apparently been keeping a log of every storm without ever once opening it, and he opened it standing up at that table, and my mother's face, closed all evening, finally moved because the enabler was off script, and she has no play for that. Nobody does. Their whole system was built on him, never doing the math out loud. Consequences, honestly rendered, 7 weeks on. There was no divorce filing, before anyone asks, and I've made peace with that not being mine to demand. What there is my father in twice-a-week therapy at 64, driving himself, keeping the appointment card on the fridge where she can see it, which in that house is practically a manifesto. What there is a boundary I delivered in writing, because paper doesn't get reframed. My mother can have a relationship with me again on one condition: an in-person apology to Whitney, by name, for 41 specific messages, with nothing after the word sorry, no in love, no context. She has so far produced one letter, which contained the sentence, "I am sorry you felt managed," and I returned it with that line circled in red pen and nothing else, which Paige says was cold, and which Whitney says was the most efficient document in the history of your family. The apology remains unproduced, so the chair remains empty. Paige, for her part, did her own accounting without being asked. She called every relative she'd ever repeated the Whitney was texting some other guy's story to, individually, 11 calls, and corrected the record by name, and then she told me she'd done it, not for credit, just so I'd know the rumor was dead in every house it ever lived in. My sister read message 17 once, and spent a weekend unpoisoning a well she didn't dig. That's what the other kind of family looks like, for anyone keeping a file. Because here's how Christmas went. I hosted, first time ever. Paige and her husband came. My father came, drove himself through the snow, brought store-bought pie and apologized for it twice, and fixed my garbage disposal without being asked, because in my family, fixing things is how you say I love you, and I've decided that sentence gets to mean something clean again. And Whitney came. As what? I honestly couldn't tell you yet. Her divorce finalized in November. We've been talking every few days for months. We've been careful the way you're careful with a rebuilt engine, and she stood in my kitchen drying dishes next to my father, while he told her an embarrassing story about me and a childhood bike ramp, and I stood in the doorway holding a dish towel, doing no fixing at all, because for once in my life, nothing in the room was broken. One chair stayed empty. We didn't set it dramatically. This isn't a movie. We just were an odd number. And at some point I noticed, and I let myself feel the whole complicated weight of it for about 10 seconds, and then Paige's husband sat in it to reach the pie. So that's where it is, Reddit. 5 years, 41 messages, 52 seconds, one empty chair. Here's what I need the comments to argue about. Sincerely. Was I right to play that voicemail with my father and sister at the table? Or did I do to my mother exactly what she fears most? A public loss she couldn't manage, when a private one might have left more to rebuild. Does my father get credit for standing up at 64? Or does 40 years of dressing for her weather make him a co-signer on everything, including my 41 messages, and the one Whitney and I have agreed to stop asking each other, and give to strangers on the internet instead? After 5 stolen years, both of us older, one of us divorced, the crime finally named, is what we're carefully rebuilding a second chance, or are we just two people standing in the parking lot of a venue, unable to say what we're doing there? What would you do with the empty chair?